With us today, we have Pierre-Etienne Minonzio from French publication L'Equipe and Tom Williams, author of Va Va Voom, The Modern History of French Football as well. Tom, PSG lost to Arsenal 2-0, but PSG also arrived at the Emirates unbeaten in their first 7 games this season. This was their first defeat post the Kylian Mbappe era in the summer. What key learnings can PSG take from the post Mbappe era?
I mean, they have looked great in Ligue 1. I mean, they've won 5 of their first 6 matches. They only dropped points at House. They've been playing some lovely football. They've been scoring a lot of goals. But I think what we saw against Arsenal was when the level goes up, they don't currently look sufficiently well equipped to compete at the very highest level. I mean, it was 2-0. But I mean, it could conceivably have been more. I thought Arsenal looked extremely comfortable, and PSG didn't really lay a glove on them. And when you look at the team that PSG put out, obviously Ousmane Dembele wasn't involved for the reasons that we know, but even setting that to one side, it was an extremely inexperienced lineup. You look at the PSG front three: Bradley Barcola, Kang Lee, Desiré Doué. Huge amount of talent there, huge amount of potential, but next to no Champions League experience. And at no point did PSG ever really know how they were even going to try and cause problems for Arsenal. I mean, there was a period in the second half where Arsenal dropped off a little bit, allowed PSG to have the ball, and PSG didn't really create a great deal. So I think what this game against Arsenal really shows is that PSG might be able to succeed in Ligue 1 with this new superstar-free approach. But it's going to be very difficult to cause problems for the leading sides in the Champions League, particularly when arguably their most dangerous player in Ousmane Dembele is left out of the starting 11.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. And what about sort of goal scoring as well? Mbappe provided so many goals in his time. They've got Gonzalo Ramos, Colomwani. How have they sort of bedded in since Mbappe has left?
Well, I think the expectation was when we got to the end of the transfer window and PSG hadn't signed an obvious Mbappe replacement. There was talk of a potential interest in Victor Osimhen earlier in the summer, but that didn't really look like it was ever going to go anywhere. When you realise that they weren't going to sign a new Mbappe, the expectation I think was, well, it's going to be either Gonzalo Ramos or Randal Colomwani. But in actual fact, Luis Enrique seems determined to play with a false nine without a centre forward. It's been Marco Asensio when he's been fit, and he interprets that role brilliantly. I can't remember him doing it all that often at Real Madrid, but certainly when he's played there for PSG, he's looked really good. Has a great understanding with the players around him. I mean, there was a 6-0 win at home to Montpellier back in August where PSG played with that configuration. Asensio was brilliant. And okay, they were playing a pretty feeble Montpellier team, but you could see what Luis Enrique was trying to do. Ramos is currently injured, is going to be out for a little while. Colomwani is not injured, but Luis Enrique clearly just doesn't fancy him and uses him more as a right-sided attacking forward than as a number 9. So yeah, not only did PSG decide not to replace Mbappe with something approaching a like-for-like signing, but they appear to be approaching this season with the idea that they're not going to play with a conventional centre forward. I mean, as and when Ramos returns from injury, perhaps that will change. But I think it suits Luis Enrique better in terms of the kind of football he wants to see, the kind of control of the ball that he wants to see from his side, to play with a false 9 rather than a centre forward. But then, as we saw against Arsenal last night, where Kang Lee had a pretty thankless evening, it might not necessarily cut it at this very high level.
Yeah, Pierre-Etienne, from a publication standpoint, was there much optimism for this team in evolution coming to London to perhaps get a result?
Before the game, we didn't know. There was more questions than answer from this beginning of season, so we didn't know what to expect. There was some hope, and among the fans, there was this idea that the team runs more. This is a different team, more collective, with a more collective effort. And there was this hope that maybe it was more a team that individual player. But in the end of the day, the idea after this game, it's kind of fatalism among the PSG fan, for example. There is this idea that for PSG, what whatever the team is, the starting team is, this is always the same outcome, which is you beat average team in Europe, but when you play the best team like Arsenal, and then you lose. And you lose always for the same reason. You lose because there is mistakes from Donnarumma, because there is a lack of physicality in the midfield, and because you're not good at set pieces. So among the PSG fan and among the journalists who cover the club as well, there is a kind of fatalism.
Yeah, for sure. Well, PSG named the second youngest starting 11 on Tuesday night in the Champions League, with 7 of their 11 being 23 or under. Now, watching on for the Athletic at the Emirates was Peter Rutzler. Here's what he made on a night of learning for Luis Enrique's side.
I think tonight was a bit of a learning curve for this Paris Saint-Germain team. Obviously, it's a young side, but I think they came up against an Arsenal team who are getting close to those final stages now under Mikel Arteta. Yes, they still will want those big trophies to mark that, but in terms of what they're showing on the field, there's a maturity about Arsenal, there's a nous about Arsenal that they showed from set plays again, a level of know-how that was just that step beyond what PSG are able to offer at this point. And of course, they're still quite early on in their development under Luis Enrique. This is their second season. There are a lot of young players in the team, but what we saw tonight was not quite schooling, but it was certainly an education in playing to the big occasion, making your mark on the contest. Now, there were some elements that went against them. Gianluigi Donnarumma had another difficult night in Europe. It just doesn't seem to work for him at this level in a PSG shirt. They lacked the physicality in midfield, which was a bit predictable in terms of Vitinha, João Neves and Warren Zaire-Emery, and of course they lacked a focal point with Lee Kang-in coming up against a brick wall against William Saliba and Gabriel. Luis Enrique was quite spiky afterwards.
Mikel Arteta has been managing Arsenal, I think that's the 5th or 6th year. 5th, okay. I've been managing that team 1 year and 2 months. I don't know where we are. I have a clear idea where I want to be, but I don't know how many time I'm going to need.
I think that was actually reflective of the fact that PSG just aren't there yet. They're just not at that stage of their development, and it will take time. There is a style of play that's evident. The progress they made last year, yes, helped by Kylian Mbappe, which shows that there are steps in the right direction, but there is a sizable gulf between where they want to be and where they are now.
Tom, I mean, you can grant him that, because he is right. Arteta has been doing this for a lot longer, and he's still in the midst of, I guess, setting his standards with this team. And this is also a team that's made, I think, 20 new signings in the last 2 or so years. You got to give them grace that, there is still more to come. So perhaps a bit more pragmatism, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and this has been Luis Enrique's message quite consistently. I mean, he even goes so far as to say that there's no expectation at the club for him to win the Champions League. So actually, people should stop getting obsessed about, PSG's record in the Champions League, because this is a new project, and it is going to take time. And you hear a similar thing when you speak to people at PSG. This is a fairly radical new direction that the club is trying to move in. No more superstars, no more egos, no more bling bling. It is going to take time. We want a young, humble, hardworking team, more French players. And we want to see football that we enjoy. And there is a very steely determination behind that. I mean, Luis Enrique is the coach who's been chosen to enact this transformation, and arrived with the impeccable credentials of having already won the Champions League at Barcelona in 2015. Obviously been coach of Spain as well, but up to the very highest level of the club, this is now the position. And in a way, it sometimes almost feels like an act of self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. It's like we try the superstar thing. Look at the team we had: Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe. The 3 of the best footballers of their generation. We put them all on the pitch at the same time. We paid them huge wages, and what did we get? Nothing. So we're not going to do that anymore. And to show you how serious we are, we're not going to sign any superstar players or anyone who, looks like they might be about to, lead their team to Champions League glory. We're going in the opposite direction. And that is why when Luis Enrique drops Ousmane Dembele on the eve of, this pivotal game, when he decides that he can do without Kylian Mbappe towards the end of last season, after Mbappe makes it known that he's not going to extend his contract, the club says, yep, we back you. He's our guy. This is the new approach. I think the difficulty for PSG is that the expectation, both within France, but I think in particular outside France, is that PSG are going to be Champions League contenders. We know that this is, the ultimate ambition of the owners and has been ever since they bought the club in 2011. So although when you look at the team, you look at the lineup and you see how it's evolving, you feel that, yes, this is going to take time. Yes, this is a different kind of PSG. Everyone in the wider football world kind of thinks, well, with the resources they have, PSG, they should be targeting Champions League success. So it kind of creates this unhelpful tension where on the one hand, you've got Luis Enrique and the club saying, new project, younger players, we need patience, it's going to take time. And the wider football world that thinks, well, yeah, sure, fine. But if you're not succeeding in the Champions League, what is even the point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pierre-Etienne, you were sort of smiling there when Tom was saying those things about PSG. And I guess, yeah, he mentions, no more bling-bling signings, no more Messi, no more Neymar, no more Mbappe. I guess Donnarumma's probably the last bling-bling signing, once hailed as the best goalkeeper in Europe at one time. But do you think with this new squad, and I think the Champions League is important for PSG, that the fans are now thinking maybe in the past we didn't have, the heart or the steel to win the Champions League in the later stages. Perhaps with this new identity and Luis Enrique calling the shots, maybe we have an opportunity.
I think so. I think for the fans, for example, Kylian Mbappe was obviously very, very much respected, but I didn't get the feeling he was loved in some way, because he gave the impression sometimes that he was bigger than the club, and everybody knew that he was about to leave to Madrid one day. So what do love the fan, it's quite obvious like in every club. The PSG fans, they love players that gave everything for the shirt, like Edison Cavani, for example. He was maybe the last idol of the Parc des Princes, because he was sometimes awkward, in front of the goal, but every time he gave everything. So I got this feeling that PSG fans buy into this strategy because they want players that run a lot on the pitch. That was not the case the previous season. And also the fact that there is more French player in the starting 11, it's more easy for them. It's easier for them to, to feel connected with the whole team. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think they do agree with this new politics.
The summer, of course, saw arguably PSG's biggest star of all time move on. Kylian Mbappe finally swapped Paris for Madrid. Ahead of Tuesday's night's clash, Mike Stavro caught up with PSG fans outside the Emirates to gauge the mood amongst the supporters.
I think Mbappe was a great player. He is always a great player, even if he scores less, actually.
Now we play as a team. We don't have any stars at all. And we feel that we feel now that we have a complete team.
Do you like Luis Enrique as a manager? Obviously, we heard the other day that Ousmane Dembele is not in the squad. Do you like that? He's tough.
It seems like PSG is more important than players. Thanks to him, maybe we will play like a team. Before it was only Neymar's team, Mbappe's team, Ibrahimovic's team. Maybe we will be like a team.
For many years, we say that our club had a lack of strong arm, to let the voice, let the manager manage. And the stars are a little bit, selfish.
Who do you think out of the squad now do you think will become the biggest star? Who's the next star, do you think?
Barcola will be the next star.
Maybe Barcola, because he is a young player. If Luis Enrique can give him some confidence, I think he will be a great player in France and Paris too.
João Neves. Man, if you've never seen him, man, pay tickets and see this guy, watch this guy playing. This guy is, I don't have any word for that.
Pierre, do you have any translation for, ooh, is there
I was surprised by his awful French accent because usually the French, when they speak English, they don't have any accent like me. So I was a bit surprised by what I just hear.
But let's bring it back to some of what they spoke about actually, because I think Luis Enrique, and we were just following on from what you said just earlier, is really important in this equation because if you think about the role perhaps previous managers would have had of PSG, Luis Enrique seems to be a manager they've brought in to have his stamp on it. But also, when you see him in press conferences, he's very vocal about what he wants to do, how he wants to do it, and also without being weird, but like he's quite strict about it. Is that quite refreshing for PSG?
Yes, definitely. And I think that if Luis Campos, the sporting director of PSG, chose this guy, it's exactly for that, And you have to remember that when he was at Barcelona, um, it was, I think, in January 2016, he decided to put Messi on the bench, which is what nobody's never do, because they had a kind of argument in training. And the idea was to say, I'm the boss. Even if you're the best player in the world ever, I'm the boss, and I decided if you don't play. And I think in the end of the day, that helps the whole team because that year they managed to win the Champions League. And I think this is the same idea here. Is the idea of Luis Campos is to think that in a whole big European club, the main character of the club is supposed to be the manager and not the player. And as you said in the previous season, there was many occasions in which you see that the main character was a player. For example, I don't know, Messi, when he was playing at Paris Saint-Germain after a defeat, he decided to miss a training to go to Saudi Arabia because he has a personal partnership with Saudi Arabia to promote the country and then to come back. And he missed a training, So it's totally crazy. So this is this kind of thing that used to happen in Paris Saint-Germain. And so what happened with Dembele is a symbol, is to say that the new boss in town, the new sheriff in town, is not the player, it's Luis Enrique. And you may hope that in long term it could be useful. It reminds me a bit as well at what Arteta did with Aubameyang, for example,
Yes, for
at the
sure.
beginning of Arsenal. It was the best player, and he said, okay, you don't play because according to me, your behavior as a captain is not good. So at the moment you think, okay, you put your best player on the bench, that's stupid. But in the end of the day, on the long term, it shows to the other player where is the power now. So, I mean, it's kind of logical decision for me in the end of the day.
Yeah, Tom, in establishing who the main character is, Luis Enrique left out Ousmane Dembele. For a lot of people listening to this, they would have been watching that match thinking, I mean, he could have made the difference in this match. Why on earth did Enrique not bring Dembele to London?
So the full details of exactly what happened between the two of them have not yet emerged. What appears to have happened is that there was an exchange of views after the game against Rennes on Friday, and that Dembele made the mistake of sort of pushing back a little bit against some of the feedback that he got from Luis Enrique, and Luis Enrique didn't like that, and so decided to leave him out of the game. When he was asked about it in his pre-match press conference, he said that there's no place in his squad for players who don't respect their obligations towards the team and for players who aren't ready. So there's something about the way that Dembele, was preparing for this game, was perhaps reflecting on his own performances that Luis Enrique didn't like. And that's why he was left out. And it was obviously a very striking decision because Dembele is so key to the way that PSG play. He is the closest thing that they have to a superstar. He is the player who jumps out the most when you watch PSG. I mean, the guy who kind of gets them going the most. And they badly missed him against Arsenal. I mean, Desiree Doué is a very versatile, very talented player. I don't think the right wing role would be his first choice if he had to, decide where to put himself into the team. And so the thought of, Dembele going up against Ricardo Calafiori, dragging him inside onto his weaker side. I mean, you can imagine PSG having a bit of joy with that. So it's an example of the potential consequences of this no nonsense approach that Luis Enrique is determined to pursue. And again, I think, as Pierre-Etienne mentioned earlier, you have to think about this in the context of what's been going on at PSG in recent years. These superstar players brought in, given huge salaries, generating enormous expectations, not really seeming to buy into the club, the culture of the club, not always following all the rules, and people being sick of it. The fans were sick of it. And people at the club were sick of it. And there was a feeling that, the tail was wagging the dog and PSG were being taken for a ride. And so that is why when a decision like this is taken, even though it obviously hurts PSG in a sporting sense, there isn't a huge amount of dissent. There will be PSG fans who were dismayed at the thought of going up against Arsenal without Dembele. But because of the recent history of the club, I think the feeling is still, this is what needed to happen.
Yeah, I'm interested in that, Pierre, Etienne, from your perspective. Enrique also says in that press conference, I signed for PSG last season to create a team, and I can guarantee that I'm going to create a team until the last day I'm in Paris. I mean, that's very strong words from the manager there. But this is also the Champions League, Pierre Etienne. If there was one person that could have created a difference yesterday, surely it was Ousmane Dembele.
Yes, I do agree with that, obviously, but you could also argue that even with Dembele, they would have lost with no doubt, because the whole problem was in the midfield. There was no impact, no creativity. Though even if you have a very good player who was able to make difference, you didn't have a proper number 9 yesterday. Lee was in real difficult. He had a difficult game, so I don't know if it would have made in the end of the day a huge difference. To be honest, and as you said, it's true that Doué, but Desiré Doué is only 19. So it's a very gifted player, but he will be good in the next few years. No, he's still very young, so it was a hard game for him as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Just on Mbappe as well, because I'm interested in his departure from a PSG fan perspective. I think we sort of touched on it. How much is that departure now being spoken about in Paris, especially given that the ghost of Mbappe sort of hasn't left PSG? There's still a bit of a court case going on at the moment, Pierre-Etienne.
Yeah. Actually, if the PSG fan talk about Mbappe, it's more about a problem concerning his wage, So if we have to sum up very quickly, maybe to explain what is happening, obviously in the beginning of last season, there was 1 year remaining in his contract. He wanted to leave. Nasser, the president of PSG, told him, okay, if you want to leave, sign a new contract. Otherwise, we won't get any fee for the transfer. It's not possible. Mbappe answered, I won't sign anything because if I sign a new contract, you won't allow me to leave. So it didn't go anywhere. In the end of the day, they managed to find a solution, which was you do leave, but in order the club don't lose money, you accept to didn't earn all your wage. Okay, you don't take all the money, but in the end of the day, if you do that, we allow you to play again, because at this very time, in the beginning of the next season, Mbappe was not allowed to play. He was what we call in France in the loft. It's important to explain it because it's huge amount of money. It's 55 millions that of euros that Mbappe is claiming from his former club, plus interest, because the more you wait, the more there will be interest. And actually, it seems that the case is more for Mbappe for now, that he has more chances to get the money. So obviously, a lot of fans are with the fact that their club is going to lose a lot of money because of Mbappe. So this is the main case of discussion, more than there is no nostalgia, by the way, about his sporting aspect, but there is a huge topic of discussion because of his case.
Okay. Tom, moving on Mbappe and the ghost of Mbappe, it may seem, Is that the final step really in really establishing Luis Enrique as the most powerful individual, the main character, let's use Pierre's phrase, at the club, at PSG, but also if we're thinking about the emerging stars, how much impact has Enrique had in bringing those players that he wants into the club?
Yeah, I mean, I think you go back to last season and look at the way that Luis Enrique handled Mbappe, and that the club were very eager to make it clear that that was his decision rather than the club's decision when he, started not picking Mbappe in a starting 11. And the explanation he gave was, well, he's not going to be here for that much longer. Apparently, he wants to leave, so we need to start preparing for next season. Which sounded mad at the time. Like, why would you not put one of the best 2 or 3 players in the world in your team every single match if you're able to? But that was how he decided to approach things, and he was allowed to do that by his hierarchy. There was no pushback, there was no pressure to put Mbappe in the starting 11. So I think that was the clearest sign that Luis Enrique was, was the new boss. And then, yeah, in terms of the players that he's picking this season, he is left the freedom to pick the team as he sees fit. And, I think one of the consequences of that is this determination to play without a recognised number 9, is to occasionally align midfield trios that are very technically gifted, much like the one we saw at the Emirates last night, but that don't really pack much of a punch physically. And he's been given freedom to tie things together. And you go back to last season in the Champions League, PSG were dreadful in the group phase, certainly away from home, notably getting stuffed at Newcastle. And Luis Enrique said, okay, obviously this isn't good, but the team hasn't finished developing yet. Judge us at the end of the season, judge will be better in February or March. And there wasn't much that happened in the intervening period to suggest that PSG would be better in February and March. But lo and behold, in the Champions League, at least they were. They got through to the semi-finals, albeit with a slightly favourable draw. Were unlucky to lose to Borussia Dortmund over the 2 legs. And so he could point to a development. And, I think we're in a similar position now. PSG were clearly miles off Arsenal last night. But this is a different PSG. This is a different phase of the project. And one thing we can be sure of is that Luis Enrique will be given the time to turn things around and to figure things out. And you would expect that they will once again be a better, more cohesive unit once we get into the Champions League knockout phase. I guess the worry now, given that massive gulf between PSG and Arsenal that we all spotted last night, is that can PSG be sure of making it to the knockout phase? And I think there's going to be there is going to be pressure on PSG, having lost this first big test of the season against Arsenal. And as much as Luis Enrique talks about the need for patience and the long-term project and blah, 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 if PSG were to fail to qualify for the knockout phase of the Champions League, that would be seen as a pretty enormous disappointment.
Yeah, Pierre-Etienne, we have sort of skirted around this fact that, PSG are moving on from the Galactico era, and it's potentially a good thing moving forward, and it is a long-term project, we've just said. But I'm just thinking about the city of Paris. I'm thinking about Ligue 1. I'm thinking about, the previous, superstars that were at PSG, Ronaldinho, Cavani, Ibrahimovic, Neymar, Messi, Mbappe, of course, commercially for Ligue 1 as well. How is important that PSG do have some sort of star that can be commercially viable for that league to be sold on a global scale?
Yeah, obviously it's not good for championship. It's obvious, but you could also all argue that if there is a over dominant team, as it's not good as well, because you always predict the outcome of the championship, so it's not good as well. But for example, there is we had a lot of difficulty in France to attract overseas broadcaster. And yeah, one of the reasons is the fact that obviously there is no more Mbappé, Neymar, and Messi. So yeah, it's not good in the general business, and but in the end of the day, it remains a very attractive team. And I think that in France, for example, for every away game, the stadium are full to see the PSG. So it remains obviously the very much much more attractive team in France.
Okay. Were you surprised that they didn't push more for someone like Victor Osimhen, for instance, in the summer? Because there was so much conversation around that, and Kvaratskhelia as well. That sort of link up would have been quite an astonishing one for PSG.
Yes, but I got the feeling that in England you offer the tune tax to explain that Newcastle recently has to overpay some player because of the money of Saudi Arabia, and I think that obviously there is the same tax with PSG, the Qatar tax. Club ask more money to PSG than to other club, and I got the feeling that PSG are quite tired of that, and the amount of money that were asked for Osimhen, yeah, maybe they are tired of spending so much money, and Enrique is like, okay, instead of buying a player 120 million, let's buy two very gifted midfielder of 50 or 60 million. This is the whole idea. So
From listening to the fans there, Tom, Bradley Barcola, is a name that keeps coming up with a lot of fans. And we did a podcast last year and we were talking about him as a player and how, the Lyon chairman was just like, I love this kid. I can't believe we have to sell him to PSG. What do people make of him? I've seen a few clips and it's hard to say from clips, but it looks like he's been taken apart of some Ligue 1 defenders this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's had an exceptional start to the season. I mean, obviously disappointing against Arsenal last night, but then he wasn't alone in that. I think Barcola is one of those players who every time you watch him, you start to think that his ceiling might be even higher than you thought it was previously. He has just constantly defied expectations. You think back to when he went to PSG, summer 2023, he'd had one very successful half season at Lyon. He had a great partnership with Alexandre Lacazette. He was one of the key figures in Lyon's successful second part of the season under Laurent Blanc. Goes to PSG for about 50 million euros. And I think most people thought that was a mistake. He is not going to play. He is competing for a place with Kylian Mbappe, who is never going to be dropped. He might get the odd run out on the right-hand side, say, but, probably not a great idea. And within a few months, Barcola has convinced Luis Enrique that he is so reliable that Luis Enrique ends up reconfiguring the PSG attack, putting Mbappe at number 9 and systematically picking Barcola on the left-hand side. And yeah, he's got this wonderful, extremely fluid, very kind of free dribbling style. It's not kind of step overs and kind of showy touches. It's all just in the hips and the body movement, and beats players in a very sort of natural way. Has started this season brilliantly, 6 goals in 6 league games. Kylian Mbappe said something quite interesting about him during the last international break in September. He said at some point he's going to stop scoring goals quite as regularly. That's just going to happen. He's a young player. You can't keep up that level forever. When that happens, please don't hammer him. Give him the space, give him the patience. And actually, so he scored after 12 seconds against Italy at the Parc des Princes in the first game in the international break. Then had a little bit of a dip in form, hadn't looked as good, and it kind of felt like Mbappe's prophecy had, come true quite quickly. There's a lot of talk around Warren Zaïre-Emery at PSG as like a truly homegrown player, and PSG wanting him to be the symbol of the new post-superstar PSG. But I wonder whether actually Barcola might not be almost a more natural kind of figurehead because he plays in a more attacking position, because he has this wonderful, expressive way of playing. And I think if he carries on his current trajectory, he will very quickly, be taken taken in and fully adopted by the PSG fans as one of their all-time favorite players.
Yeah, there's something interesting about Barcola is the fact that it's show again how Luis Enrique is important in the PSG, because when he was bought by PSG, he was bought 50 millions euros, 50 millions, and he had played like maybe 20 games in the French first division. So when we saw the price, we were like, it's totally nonsense. It's totally nonsense because he was good, but it was not Kylian Mbappe. It was not a guy we've been playing for years saying he will be huge. No, so everybody was like, and apparently this is Luis Enrique from the beginning who said, I want this guy. I know he will be a huge player. I know his qualities, and we are going to pay whatever it costs. And at this time, it seems like a mistake because it was so expensive. And now, it looks like a very, very good decision. But he remains very young. His nickname Bambi in France. So like the Walt Disney movie. So this is his idea that he's quite young and he still have a lot to prove. And especially because now we see that the defender are playing differently around him. There is specific tactical defense around him. And it's a bit more difficult these last few games for him, but he will show. He's able to improve.
Another tricky thing concerning Barcola's sort of evolution is the way that Luis Enrique sets PSG up doesn't necessarily help him, because the left-sided fullback Nuno Mendes is instructed not to attack. We saw this against Arsenal when there's a PSG fullback flying down the touchline with the ball. It is almost always Achraf Hakimi on the right-hand side. And despite having a left-back in Nuno Mendes who is capable of playing in a similar way and who is great going forward, he's actually better going forward than he is defending a lot of the time, his instructions are, you tuck in on the left-hand side and, give Hakimi the freedom to go forward on the right. And that means that what happens quite a lot now with Barcola is that when the ball gets to him, he has two defenders up against him. Opposition teams are doubling up on him because they know how dangerous he is. Whereas in another team, you would expect the left back to come flying past him on the outside and take one of those defenders away. Nuno Mendes is just kind of standing on the halfway line following instructions. So that's another thing that Barcola will have to get to grips with. But at the same time, he's shown that he's capable of beating two or three players, in one dribble. So it doesn't look like the kind of thing that's going to intimidate him too much.
Yeah, well, PSG are riding high. Well, next to Monaco, actually, in Ligue at this moment in time. The Luis Enrique era is fully in flow. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, Pierre-Etienne and Tom as well. And also to you guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.